It's February 3rd, 2022. We've got 5 bill hearings today, some rather lengthy discussion. So I do hope that we will maintain our questions accordingly. February 3rd, 2022. Hey, Tom, would you go ahead and mute yourself, brother, because I'm hearing myself. It's pretty awkward. Thank you very much. We have 5 bills today, starting with House Bill 377. Delegate Corman.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair, Mr. Vice Chair. It's exciting to be before the New Look Economic Matters Committee, and hello to all the committee members as well. I come before you today with HB 377, the Maryland Automobile Insurance Fund Installment Payment Plans legislation. Maryland Automobile Insurance Fund, or MAIF, is the sort of insurer of last resort for auto insurance for Marylanders. As you know, you're supposed to be auto insured in the state of Maryland. Some individuals are not able to obtain insurance on the regular market, so we have MAIF in place as a backstop. The purpose of this bill is to alter the practices by which MAIF sells its insurance on an installment basis in order to make auto insurance more accessible and affordable to Marylanders. For many Marylanders, MAIF is the only option available for insurance. However, there are drivers who actually can't afford MAIF's premiums, which means they either illegally drive uninsured or use premium financing plans, which I'll talk more about in a moment. In 2013, the General Assembly passed a somewhat restrictive installment payment plan program for MAIF, which permitted installment plans by MAIF. Prior to that, they weren't allowed to have installment plans. You had to pay your whole premium at a time, with some pretty strict requirements: a mandated 25% down payment and 6 installments for an annual premium less than $3,000, or 20% down and 8 installments for an annual premiums of $3,000 or more. The 2013 policy change by this committee and the legislature was the correct one and designed to make auto insurance more accessible and affordable. But we know now, almost a decade later, that the General Assembly did not go far enough. MAIF is a quasi-state agency. We call it over in appropriations a non-budgeted state agency. Their budget's actually before the subcommittee I chair over there every year, and every year we hear about this issue and receive a recommendation from the Department of Legislative Services that we, as a General Assembly, loosen the restrictions on installment plans by MAIF to allow them to do installment plans in a more attractive and affordable way that will allow more Marylanders to obtain coverage at reasonable rates. The result of the status quo is that since the inception of the MAIF installment plan, only 2% of MAIF policyholders have opted to use the installment plan. 96% use these private premium financing entities, and 2% pay in full. The challenge with the premium financing is that there may be lower down payments than what's under the MAIF plans, but there's an interest rate, a regulated interest rate, that's then applied to the premiums, which can be quite costly in the long term and be very harmful to, frankly, the economic well-being of these folks who, we're telling them they need to get insurance. They're having trouble finding it on the open market, so they're going to MAIF because they can't get coverage on the open market, and then they're forced to pay these interest rates. The MAIF installment plan should be reformed so that drivers using our state insurer of last resort can make reasonable payment plans that they can afford, and we can remove these sort of somewhat arbitrary statutory restrictions. A lot of the sort of concern that I've read in the submitted testimony from the opponents are, issues that happy to talk about, whether the Maryland Insurance Administration can adequately regulate this, whether the MAIF has adequate staffing to deal with this, whether this will affect MAIF's assessments. While I appreciate the concern of the opponents on these issues, those are really issues for this committee and the rest of the General Assembly to be concerned about, not ones that the premium financing industry needs to be concerned about. They don't need to worry about whether the MAIF can handle call center volume. That's really an issue for us to be concerned about as policymakers. So I hope the committee and the legislature will look at this issue and find that now's the time for us to act and help vulnerable Marylanders have easier access to reasonable auto insurance. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I would hope that we could hear from MAIF before going any further.
We'll hold our questions off for the moment, and obviously we'll come back to Delegate if there are any questions concerning you. You want to hear from MAIF first?
If you don't mind, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, let's call on Mr. Al Redmer.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, thank you. Good to see you. And once again, congratulations on your appointment as chair, Mr. Chair. Thank you to the sponsor. This really is a straightforward bill. It just simply allows MAIF to offer the same type of installment payment plans that are routinely offered by every other insurer. It just simply removes the installment plan restrictions that are in place. And I want to point out, it concerns how a policy is paid for, does not change who we can or who we cannot insure. Those restrictions would remain in place. And, there's really no reason why our policyholders should be in a position of having to finance their premium payments and pay interest, unlike other carriers. And removing the installment payment restrictions does not make us a competitive insurer. As mentioned, we would still remain the residual insurer of last resort. That wouldn't change. We would still be the insurer of last resort and could not insure anyone unless, as it is now, they've been turned down by a carrier turned down by two carriers or canceled by one. And MAIF currently has less than 2% of the market share, and that would not significantly change except for the possibility of maybe insuring those folks that currently go uninsured. It's important to note our installment plan would have to be filed and approved by the Maryland Insurance Administration, taking into consideration our down payment and the number of installments offered. And any changes to that initial approval, the commissioner would be required to file a report about the change with the General Assembly. And as you know, the Maryland Insurance Administration continuously reviews our financial status, and they routinely are concerned about any financial impairment that we would have. So, as an example, and I'd like to,
brother, we got a lot of folks today, but I know you got a few more people with MAIF that are going to discuss.
Yep.
And I just want to leave as much time for questions as possible, if that's okay.
I will. Yes. The only thing I'll emphasize is that the Insurance Administration would never do anything that would cause us to be in financial impairment. And with that, with your permission, we'll go to Dave Pfeiffer, our COO, to talk about the operational aspect of the bill.
That would be fine. Mr. Pfeiffer.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman and committee members. My name is Dave Pfeiffer. I'm the Chief Operating Officer for Maryland Auto, and I'm testifying in support of Bill 377. And what I'd like to do is add some additional operational comments to what Mr. Redmer has already said. Maryland Auto has anticipated and is prepared for the increased workload related to the changing in our installment plan. We expect to see increased phone calls for our fiscal, underwriting, and claim operations due to the additional needs of our customers. We also have adequate internal staff and backup to redeploy to cover this change. We currently have an automated billing system called PBS, capable of handling additional installment plans. It is a relatively straightforward process for us to adjust the existing programs to accommodate any additional plans the Maryland Insurance Administration would approve for Maryland Auto. We currently, under our PBS system, can provide installment invoices. We can accept various types of payments, and MAIF policyholders can even make credit card payments online 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. We also issue cancellation notice and reinstatements as a part of our due process, and that would not change. So from our standpoint, we don't see any operational issues with the change. Again, given the producers still have the greatest influence on how customers buy and pay for their premiums, we don't expect a dramatic change in the foreseeable future, but we are prepared for any changes that might occur. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for the time.
Thank you very much. Are there any questions for the witnesses that we've had thus far? Seeing none. I'll go to our next witness, which is Sandra Dotson.
Good afternoon, Chairman Wilson and Vice Chairman Crosby. For the record, Sandra Dodson with Maryland Auto Insurance Fund. I have no additional testimony to add. Chairman Wilson and committee members just available for questions, and we urge a favorable report on House Bill 377.
That's wonderful testimony, ma'am. Thank you very much. Seeing no questions, this concludes the hearing. Thank you, Delegate Corman. All right, next we have Delegate Crosby with House Bill 266. Vice Chair Crosby.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair and fellow members of my committee, Economic Matters. For the record, Delegate Brian Crosby, here to present House Bill 266 on enhanced uninsured motorist coverage. This is a simple bill, and it is a concept that we discussed a lot. It is opt-out versus opt-in, and it corrects a policy that I believe the House got wrong in 2007, or excuse me, the body got wrong in 17, excuse me, when I was not here. And the only real time you think about this coverage is really at the worst time after an accident. So let me give some history here. In 2017, or prior to 2017, you had driver A with $30,000 of insurance, and then driver B with $30,000 of insurance. They get into an accident, and there is no question that driver A is at fault. And the accident causes $45,000 of damage. Driver A, who has $30,000, I'll remind you, he has $30,000 of insurance and has paid premiums on that. Driver B has had $30,000 of insurance and has paid premiums on that. And again, there's $45,000 in damages. Driver B's insurance covers the first $30,000. Driver A's $30,000 then kicks in, and it goes towards the damages of driver B's, what's left over of that shortfall. And what you would think the additional $30,000 from driver A covers the remaining $15,000 in damages, it actually doesn't. As Lee Corso says, not so fast, my friend. It actually offsets driver B's policy. So it's not in addition to or stacked, it actually goes to offset that. And so what the change was in 2017, it allowed for stacking. However, it was an opt-in policy. It was passed in a bipartisan fashion. And so essentially what would happen is the 30K coverage from driver A and the 30K coverage from driver B would then be stacked on top of each other. And therefore there wouldn't be a shortfall to driver B for the remaining damages. And the glitch here is that the driver must affirmatively ask for the coverage. And I think that when I talk to most people, everyone just assumes this is how it works, is that coverage is stacked. And I don't think anybody asks for it, really, because they don't know what they're asked for or asking for. So this bill would essentially just change it from the opt-in, where you have to affirmatively ask for the coverage, to the opt-out. And I think it corrects that 2017 policy, because we're really in no different place today than we were in 2016 or immediately following when we passed the bill in 2017. And it really just affects the dynamic where now you get the coverage unless you affirmatively waive it. And the reason I think we want to do that for numerous reasons. A, I think it's good public policy, but Medicaid reimbursement, doctors get paid, hospitals get paid. And frankly, I think it comes down to, why am I paying the premiums for an insurance that really doesn't provide the coverage? Now, yesterday, the Senate had their hearing, and I went through the opposition testimony. And I just kind of want to touch on a couple things. The first is this actual statute. And the statute is 19509.1C, where, well, that 19-509 is the actual statute, but in that .1C says every carrier shall offer it. But really they bury it. And I'll give you my story. So after a family friend went through this problem, I looked to see if I even had the insurance, and I did not. And I have Geico. So when I went on Geico's website to try to select this, frankly, it was a little bit convoluted. And if I didn't know exactly what I was looking for, I think I would have just passed through, which most people do. And it was 2 drop downs, which sounds simple, but you have to select specific things within those drop downs so it makes the other drop down available. And when I talked to other people who tried to go through and select this insurance, it seemed to be that they were running into the same exact issue of it was buried. I talked to the opponents, I talked to multiple people, and they offered an information campaign. And frankly, I'd like to publicly thank them for doing something that I think they should be doing up front anyway. And so, it shouldn't take a bill for them to inform people on how to select this coverage or what this coverage actually is. Additionally, I think that they make this argument that it's a super expensive product and nobody is going to select it and rates are going to go through the roof. Typical policies run between $1.80 and $5. I have a significant amount of car insurance. I think if anybody on the committee wanted to get T-boned, I'm probably a pretty good person to hit you. I have that coverage, and mine was less than $4 a year. Most people don't carry the same amount of insurance that I carry. So for the minimum holder, I went through and looked and put it in or got quotes or got other people to get quotes from different parts of the state. And it roughly ran between $1.80 and $2.10 per month for that policy. Additionally, yesterday, I listened to some testimony about consumers making informed decisions on a rational basis. And I would just say that you can't make an informed decision unless you have the proper information to make that decision. And as I touched on earlier, I don't think that that information is made available. And then the other thing that I think is interesting is that the opponents are going to say that this isn't easy to understand and people aren't going to know how to opt out. Well, we already carry PIP. And really all we're doing is selecting a checkbox. That's it. There's nothing else to it. It's not that convoluted. It's not that complicated. And if you're being made aware up front, then I think it's easier to get out of it. And then the last 2 points I would make is, first, it's this notion that there's only 0.5% of people that have this coverage. And then that is being taken as nobody wants the coverage. But I think that there is a difference between nobody wants the coverage and nobody understands or needs the coverage. And that is a huge distinction, in my opinion. I think it's a gigantic analytical leap to just say nobody wants it because only 0.5% of people select into this. And the other argument to that is that it's only used in rare cases, but I would think that is the purpose of insurance. Like if I break my finger, I can tape it. It's not a big deal. But if I have a heart complication, when something is significant, I would want insurance to go to the hospital and provide me coverage in that instance. Additionally, the last point I would make is that it was stated that in states with EUIM, there are 56% more claims paid out, which essentially says that in Maryland, 56% more claims are paid out by a Marylander rather than an insurance company. And these bills could be significant. And you don't want people, I don't think it's good public policy that individual citizens bear the cost of something that we pay for insurance for. So with that, Mr. Chair, I don't know if that was testimony or a rant, but that concludes my testimony. I urge for a favorable opinion.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair. I'm glad you're able to get all this off your chest. I appreciate your economy of words, as always. But no, I do appreciate what we're discussing. I do believe we have a question from Mr. Delegate Ahrens. Apologize, not Mr. yet.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Delegate Crosby, just a real quick thing. This bill will obviously increase the rate. Is that right? Your insurance premium?
If it is selected, it's still an optional coverage.
But if you do it, it's an increase in their rate. And the people
But
that,
there's also an increase in coverage, right? And I think that that's the misunderstanding here is that people don't understand exactly
actually-
what their policy covers.
actually, I appreciate the bill because I think there's a lot of people that are misled on this to a point. And I've always been confused why it isn't offered, because if I'm selling something, I got an opportunity to sell something more, I will sell it. And I'm anxious to hear why that isn't the case. But I would think, though, a lot of the bills that we hear in our committee are critical of our insurance rates now and the cost. And the people that are adversely affected by this will be even more adversely affected by it. And that's one of the concerns I have about it. Can you help me with that?
Yeah, again, when I price it out across the state, or I've had other people look into what their costs would be, it's in most cases for people who are covering or have minimum coverage, it's like $2 a month. And when you explain the policy to them, every single solitary person that I have talked to basically says the same exact thing. I didn't know that was offered to me, but if it was explained to me in that manner, I would have taken it. And so, to me, it is good public policy, because the other part to this, right, is if you don't have that coverage and you get into an accident and the other driver's at fault and you don't have this coverage, then you could be stuck with a pretty significant large bill
I
at a
agree with
time
that.
when you're at your worst.
We do have a population that can't afford insurance. It is barely making it to get what they have. And by hoping to get this, I think that's just another cost we should be concerned with. But I like the bill. I like the idea of the bill. Thank you.
Ooh,
Thank you, Delegate Irons. And again, this is why I made it optional. I continued to make it optional.
and I
agree.
just
Thank
I
you.
would like to make that you're going to get some long answers from this delegate. So make sure you make your questions concise. He is full of fire on this bill. So Delegate Branch, I know you have a question.
Yeah, Mr. Vice Chair, is this basically an opt-in? So if I get what you're saying, they offer, you don't even get offered the option because it's the opt-in or because the opt-in or opt-out option. I mean, when you buy the insurance, they don't explain the other. They only explain the first option. Is that right?
It is. So
So
thank you.
basically, they're just checking, you're saying they're just checking the box or making sure that they're being offered the option that nobody's talking about.
Correct.
Is that right? And
Yes.
so I don't know if it costs more or less, but at least someone should be able to offer that so you can make that choice. Is that fair to say?
That's all I'm asking for, Delegate Branch.
Thank you.
Delegate Watson.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. Delegate Crosby, I just want to make or clarify this with you. The coverage that you're talking about, called uninsured motorist coverage, has two parts, right? One is uninsured motorist and the other is underinsured motorist. And this bill only really impacts the underinsured motorist part. Because in an uninsured motorist part, you would get the full amount. Is that correct?
Correct. And I apologize if I confused the two, but yes, this is underinsured motorist
Right.
coverage.
So it's almost as if that one coverage being lumped together confuses the issue for people. Because the coverage doesn't act the same way if you're in an accident with an uninsured motorist versus an underinsured motorist. It doesn't perform the same way. And it's almost as if they should be bifurcated so people understand it better, because that's part of the problem. Thank you.
Thank you. That was our first presenter. We will now go on to his list of witnesses. I believe we have Rob Garagiola first. Remember, sir, you have 2 minutes and counting.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Chair and members of the committee, and appreciate Delegate Crosby for sponsoring this legislation. Someday I will bring these in the committee as well. But really what I want to get to is this policy issue before you is really, do you want to put a piece of paper like we do with PIP in front of drivers that basically says, hey, it's going to cost $2, $3, $4, whatever the cost is, we're going to give you this policy that allows you to essentially stack the two policies, the driver that caused the accident and the driver that got hit, together, and not have one be the credit for the other. The policy itself, we've decided to do this in Maryland. That was done in 2017. And what we were told then is that, there'd be education, there'd be information, people would be aware of it. And what you heard from Delegate Crosby, the vice chair, is that that's not true. People are unaware of this. And frankly, his experience in trying to get that coverage seemed to be very challenging. And so really the simple issue is putting this issue before each driver to say, hey, here's what the cost is going to be. You can opt out if you want. You don't have to pay for it. It's a couple bucks a month, a cup of coffee, basically. And that's simply the choice. And that's really what this bill comes down to. It's a very simple, straightforward legislation. Would encourage a favorable committee report. And thank you, Mr. Chairman.
30 seconds to spare. Thank you very much, Rob. We also have James McAllister.
Yes. Am I on? Can you hear me?
You're on, sir, and counting.
Okay. Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman. Congratulations on your name being associated with those words in the same sentence.
Thank you, sir.
I'd like to circle back to what Delegate Watson said. When you go home tonight, take a look at the deck sheet, the declarations page that covers your insurance policy. And if you have $100,000 worth of liability coverage, you'll see it says uninsured, underinsured motorist, $100,000. So there's a hidden deductible in there when it comes to the underinsured motorist, because when you get creamed by somebody who has $30,000 policy limits, that 100 isn't 100, it's actually 70. So back in 2017, Robert Zarbin and I worked hard on this law to get it passed. And we were told, well, it's, we want it to be opt in, and everybody will know what it is. Well, nobody knows what it is, because the way it's being handled is they're only required to disclose it to you when you buy a new policy. So the overall, most of us that are renewing policies, we have no idea this coverage exists. This is coverage you buy to protect you and your family in the event that you get creamed by somebody who doesn't have enough coverage. Doesn't it make sense? Because the general insurance buying consumer doesn't know car insurance the way the car insurance industry does. Doesn't it make sense to say, let's give you the best protection and the default as the default? And then if you choose, just like we do with PIP, you want to waive PIP and save yourself a couple of bucks, then we let the consumer opt out of the better protection. Insurance is a lot like jumping out of an airplane with a parachute. Once the accident happens, once you're out of the airplane and you discover the chute you have isn't the right size, you can't get back in the airplane. Let's give consumers the default of the better coverage and let them exercise their right to opt out. Thank you.
Thank you very much. See no questions. Move on to Gwen Marie Davis.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good afternoon to all. My name is Gwen Marie Davis, and I am the managing partner at GDH Law located in Prince George's County, Maryland. I'm here today on behalf of the Maryland Association for Justice. What I want to tell you is that since this bill passed in 2017, I have seen hundreds, if not thousands of clients since then in my office. Never once have I ever seen a client of mine who has been able to benefit from having both policies combined in this case, as we're speaking of here. But I can tell you, I've had several clients that would have benefited so much from having the coverage. I've seen torn rotator cuffs, clients have needed surgery, you name it, it's been there. What we need is simply just as we have now for PIP, where you can waive PIP when you sign up if you do not want PIP. Conversely, as well too, just for it to be an education for policyholders, just to be able to say, hey, this is what it is. Do you want it? And if not, waive it. I tell you, that would benefit so many clients that I have and so many people in the state of Maryland. Today, you're going to hear from a former client of mine. Her name is Anjamila Gregory. She is a former NCAA referee, and she was involved in a bad car collision coming from a tournament, a game, and to this day was unable to benefit from having her policy. She received the policy limit from the at-fault driver, but was unable to use her policy and did not know about it and wishes she did. And she will tell you next more about that. I don't want to spoil it, but it's just so much education that is needed. And thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. Seeing no questions, we move on to Ann Jamila Gregory.
Yes. Good afternoon, Mr. Chair and committee. As Ms. Gwen Marie said, I'm a Division I basketball official, and coming home from a basketball game, I was hit on straight on by a drunk driver. This policy is very important for a number of reasons. Once they realized how bad my injuries were, I'm still 2 years later doing therapy on top of therapy, test on top of test. And all of this now is coming out of my pocket and being taken by my regular insurance company. When you go to a place to get insurance, just like they show you the paper for PIP, they should be able to show you this paper also, so that we know what we're getting into. If it's an option, that's the whole process of being able to say, you know what, no, I don't need that, or yes, I need that. My life has been a complete different situation that I never thought I would be in. 2 years later, and I cannot run, and my life is completely different. The most important part of this is I want everyone to sit and think, if this was me, if this was someone in my family, what would we do? It's very important that you look at it that way, because someone's life can be completely changed because they don't know about this, or because it's covered up by so many other pieces of paper. My life 2 years later, and I'm not able to live the way that I was living. My life is completely changed. This policy is very important, and I pray that you all say yes. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your testimony, your heartfelt testimony. Seeing no questions, move on to our next witness, David Muncy.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. Thank you for having us today. I'm not going to repeat what other people said. I'm just going to make the point that this only comes into play in the most significant of cases, the most significant of crashes, when there's severe injuries or a death, and it allows the consumer to get the full benefit of the insurance they're already paying for. I think you're going to hear from our opponents that people don't want this coverage, that it's too expensive, that the fact that less than 1% have it bears out the fact that it's not necessary and people don't want it. And I would push back on that greatly, because people just don't know about it. To echo what Gwen Marie said, in my practice, we've had thousands of cases since this was put into law in 2017, and no one's had this coverage, not one client. I've never talked to anyone that even knows what it is. The education's not happening. We need a better educated consumer class, and that's what this bill will do. It'll have the carriers show people up front that they can have this coverage, exactly what it costs, and exactly what they'll save if they don't buy it, and they can make that informed decision. If they don't want it, if it's too expensive, like Delegate Aaron said, they don't have to buy it. They can opt out. It creates a situation where people will be better informed and better covered if the worst happens to them or their family. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your concise testimony. Seeing no questions, we move on to Bruce Plaxton. Oops.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, members of the committee. My name is Bruce Plaxton. I'm a past president of Maryland Association for Justice, as well as a past legislative chair. I've been coming to Annapolis for 30 years testifying. And yesterday I heard some of the most disingenuous, what could only be described as fantasy testimony from the insurance carriers. They came and told you that this is too complicated, that it's too complicated. You know what's complicated? Our current system, where the carrier gets a credit and you don't know how much insurance you bought because you don't know how much insurance the person who hit you is going to have. This is the simplest bill. You buy 100,000, you buy 300,000, you buy 50,000. That's what you have. It's not too complicated and it's not too expensive. It's not a mandate. Yesterday, they said almost every witness for the insurance carrier called this a mandate and a guarantee of raising rates. As my partner David just said, no one has to buy this. And we talked about some of the lower level cases, but I want you to imagine someone paralyzed or catastrophically injured, loses sight, limbs, whatever, and they have $500,000 of medical bills. And the person that hit them has $300,000 worth of coverage, and they have $300,000 of coverage. They were responsible and they bought the best policy they could afford, and they can't use that policy. And what happens to the $200,000 of unpaid bills? Your constituent who is now in a wheelchair will have to go bankrupt. The state of Maryland, Medicaid won't get their money back, and the doctors and hospitals won't get paid because nobody knows about this. Nobody knows. The insurance carriers say nobody wants this coverage. They don't want the coverage because they're hiding the coverage. This is like the item in your favorite menu that's on a restaurant on the secret menu. You have to know to ask for it. And right now, nobody knows to ask for this coverage. So I urge a favorable report.
Thank you. Seeing no questions, I guess we'll go on to the unfavorables now. Nancy Egan. Nancy, you there?
Sorry, I just wanted to get started. My name is Nancy Egan. I represent American Property Casualty Insurance Company, and our members write about 15.9% of the private insurance market. What I'm here to say is that I come into your committee continuously and hear about affordability, affordability, affordability. This coverage change will shift from the current offset coverage to enhanced, which will affect about 98% of the people currently in the state of Maryland. If you look at the MIA testimony, they did a survey of the carriers, and of the carriers, of the top 10 carriers, they said less than 1 to 2% of all people carry this coverage, and that the cost to increase this coverage could range from $50 to several $100s per policy period. So we're talking about affordability. In addition, I take umbrage with some of the remarks from the prior people. The form is required and was developed by the Maryland Insurance Administration. It has 3 sections to the form describing what uninsured motorist coverage is, your option to purchase either the offset or the enhanced coverage. They're required to show exactly what the pricing is for each coverage, and the box needs to be marked by the insured. This form was put up on the public website to request feedback from the public. The trial lawyers had an option to say they thought the form was misleading, but it is required to be offered. I refer you to Bulletin 17-7 of the Maryland Insurance Administration that talks about the whole time that they offered the coverage to be reviewed, and they've revised it, and it has been in place since 2018. It's not being purchased by people when it's being offered. So I request an unfavorable report. Thank you.
Thank you. I guess I just have a quick question, Nancy. If it's not being purchased when it's being offered, what's the problem? I know that
I went through the form myself, and I appreciate the question. The form is 2 pages long. I think when you look at the history of uninsured motorists, in the beginning, you could buy coverage less than your uninsured or under an uninsured motorist coverage. The General Assembly thought it would be better that you buy limits that are equal to your current coverage. And then if you want to buy less, then you need to make an informed decision. So the form has to go through prior law disclosure, the current law disclosure, and then the additional of 19509.1 disclosure. So those are 3 things that are required to be disclosed at the time of purchase. Is the form perhaps something that could be developed and made more easy read or better to understand? I agree. It's very, very lengthy. Maybe those choices should be put up front in easy to read, and then the coverage descriptions afterwards. But I think the Insurance Administration should look at it. I can send the link to that form. I could put it up on the screen right now if you'd like. It's up to you because I have it up on my website.
Most of us drive, and we actually have auto insurance and have no idea which form you're talking about. I bet we've all signed it. I bet we've all checked that box and we've all signed it. Now, lay money, I don't have this kind of insurance either. So I guess that's my problem, because at the end of the day, what I found out the hard way with my Tesla is it was a lot easier. It was a lot cheaper for me to get hit by an uninsured motorist than it would have been to get hit by an underinsured motorist, because I could not stack because she was just underinsured. So my problem comes in, I guess, I don't believe anybody here is arguing true disingenuity here. It's just a little bit of confusion as why wouldn't we want more coverage for our actual individuals? Much like PIP and many other things, you can say no, you don't want it. And I know when I was young, I used to hustle and get the cheapest insurance I could get, as many people do. So I guess I just didn't understand what the confusion was. And I see all the R's putting their hands on the screen, so I'm sure one of them is going to explain it to me. Okay, we'll go with Delegate Pippy first.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I guess this question is for Nancy, and I'm just trying to understand. I'm not in the insurance business, I guess, per se, but insurance companies are in the business of selling insurance. So currently, as I understand it, there's a policy on the books that requires people to opt in, which means to me that statistically most people are not opting in, right? So if you change the policy to now where they have to opt out, to me, it would seem that more consumers are now being forced to buy whatever your client's products are, insurance products. So
I'm sorry, excuse me.
Sure, if you can explain to me why insurance companies don't want that.
Actually, currently, the offer is offered at the time of the point of sale. So when this was first, this first enhanced coverage was first added as a coverage back in 2018, it only affected those insurers at time of new application. It did not. It was not something that was included in your renewal as part of that disclosure. That could be something that the committee could decide to go ahead and say on renewal, this explanation should be included in the renewal packet. That is one way to get that choice out there. The other thing is that people are looking for making sure that their price is something that they can fit into their budget. So the form itself requires the carriers to describe each one of the coverages and what the costs are, so they make an informed decision. So they are on the form, and as I said, I really would send you to see the form, and I can send the link, or I can put it on the screen right now. I'm not too sure how to share with this type of thing, but I could set that form up on the screen if everyone would like to see it.
I mean, every time you sign up for a product of some sort, there's lots of forms. None of us know what they look like. Can't remember, but it almost seems like maybe the insurance companies don't like this product in general. I mean, I would at least buy it. I mean, that would make sense to me if insurance companies were like, look, we don't want to offer this coverage because it's a big loser for us. There's not a return. It's not a good business model for us. I would get that, but you're not expressly saying that. But anyways, I'll yield.
And I apologize. I think the one thing that we were concerned about is that for the people that don't want the coverage, we're going to see everyone that didn't ask for it to be changed to opt to the enhanced or excess or stacking, whatever the term is. And those people that didn't make that informed decision are now going to see this price increase. And if they want to go back to the old coverage that they had without increasing that, there's no disclosure that's going to be sent out in this bill. There's nothing being said to the consumer that this is what's happening, why your premium went up. Nothing, there's nothing there. So all of a sudden they're going to see a price increase, their coverage will be raised. There's no explanation. And like I said, from what the MIA is saying, we're talking about, and that's their survey, not mine, 98% of your driving population is going to see a price increase, which they estimated between $50 to more than $100 per policy period. And I understand that varies depending where you live and which territory. So I'm sorry, excuse me.
I believe you've answered this question. I know we have a lot more to get to, and I know Delegate Arentz has a lot more questions. Delegate Arentz.
I don't have a lot. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Nancy, I don't have a lot more questions. I just want to dig a little deeper on this. If you are a business and you're selling a product, why would you not want somebody to automatically take this by signing, say, okay, I want it? Why would the insurance company not want them to buy that coverage?
Well, I should say that, it's either you're using an agent or you're using an insurance company. So there's two different options.
I'll go with agent. Agent would be fine. Why would an agent? They make money.
Well, they could say, these are the options. These are the choices. If you want coverage that, offers this amount of coverage, 300,000, so when you're in an accident, that's all you can collect, whether the person has this much insurance or they're totally uninsured. So when you have offset coverage, the maximum you can.
I think the last two delegates have been asking the same question, which was, if you have an opportunity to charge somebody more money to get them to buy a higher end product as part of your business model, why would you be offended by that principle?
As I said, it's just a different coverage, and it just tends to raise losses and would put more impact on rates. And you're right, that coverage is available, and we can cost and price it accordingly to the coverage that's being offered.
Thank you.
Okay. I'm good, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
I'm sorry, Delegate Aaron. I just wanted to get to the point that you'd asked before. Thank you. Chris Adams, Delegate Adams.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So Nancy, let me go through the exercise. When we're buying insurance, it's deductible, it's limits. How many consumers, if this bill passes, are going to be left with a conclusion? I'll do 50, 150, and then I'll be able to stack if somebody else has 50, 150. That's the limit, and we'll ignore the possibility that, well, maybe I should be buying 250, 500, 250. In other words, you're the insurance company. You're advising me. Wouldn't you advise me to spend the money not on stacking, but rather, Chris, consider 250, 500, 250 for your limits? Or even if you really think about it, maybe you should get an umbrella. I mean, because if your concerns are what's the worst case scenario, insurance is always about not what it costs, but what happens if you have the worst case scenario. Stacking doesn't solve the worst case scenario. The only way you can solve that is to have limits that are high enough to survive a difficult scenario. And I know I'm leading your question, but it really gets to what the chair was trying to say. Why not offer it? Well, you don't offer it because it implies that it's better than anything else you can buy in the marketplace, which is wrong. Wouldn't you agree with that, Nancy?
Yes, I would, Delegate Adams. The question is, there's two parts to that anytime when you're buying insurance, how you want to protect your family and your assets when you're sued, which is the underlying BI, bodily injury per person and per accident in case you're sued, and property damage limit. And then, then as you increase those limits, automatically you're getting additional coverage in case you're hit by an uninsured driver.
Nancy, all I'm saying as a consumer, I believe that a bill like this theoretically could provide a disservice to a consumer because it implies a greater coverage than you could get by sitting down with the insurance agent, understanding what your issues are, what your goals are, and then matching your insurance to meet those goals. This sort of coverage doesn't get at this particular issue. Thank you, Mr.
And colleagues, I want to just remind everybody, we're going to have plenty of time to fight with Delegate Aaron and Delegate Adams during the voting session, but I'm not saying don't ask your questions. I just want to make sure we'll make sure we get all the stuff taken care of and aired out. Delegate Queen, or planning meeting Pam Queen.
Sorry, I forgot what meeting I'm in. Just quickly, I just quickly had a question because some of it did get answered while you were talking. So I don't know about this, and I'm glad I'm learning because we only learned about this in 2017, and I've been driving for much longer than that, and so I've never been talked about this before. But I'm still not clear on why it wouldn't be offered and offered on renewal. So maybe that's a change we need to make to the policy. And as Delegate Aaron alluded to, we live in an area where we talked about there are people who are uninsured and underinsured. It seems like to me, I would be worried about that because I've never had an accident in which I caused it. Someone else has always hit me. So I would like to have been educated on the fact that this could be a possibility. And I'm not understanding why that's not the case. And 3, the rates you're quoting of $50 to $100 are far different from what the sponsor is saying, who says he has the insurance as a rate. If someone can explain that difference at some point in time, maybe not today, I would like an answer to that. That's all.
Thank you very much. Delegate Fennell, I know you have a question. You take yourself off mute, ma'am.
Yes, I do. I do. Nancy, you talked about, and I sit on the insurance committee, you talked about affordability, but what I'm getting from my vice chair in reference to, we need to make sure that these options are known to consumers to be able to make a choice whether they can afford it or not. And it seems like, as the other gentleman stated, that the information is being hidden on a different menu, a private menu, and the consumers are not knowing about the options that they have. So I just don't get it. I'm sorry, I just don't get it. And I don't know why that it's been hidden on a separate menu. That's it.
Delegate Fennell, I actually took his concerns to the carrier and asked him to go through page by page to make sure that the consumer is making an informed decision on those pages as he had expressed. And those figures that you're hearing from me about $50 to $100, those are not my cost estimates. That's the Maryland Insurance Administrator, your regulator, who went out and surveyed the largest part of the marketplace, asking what impact it would be on the rates for uninsured, underinsured motorist coverage if this change was made. It's in their testimony, and if you'd like to see it, it's also there. And you had talked about maybe the form. I have to say that I was at the Insurance Administration when we developed this form, and perhaps it's not as clear as it should be based on things that are being said today. But if that form needs to be shortened or made more enhanced, I'm sure they would be delighted to make it more consumer friendly and more knowledgeable, or maybe a more in plain speak. For an example, I'm sure I can't speak for him, but being with the regulator prior to this, anything that would make a consumer better understand of options, I think is well spent and well deserved for the consumer. The idea of offering it at renewal is another option, as you said.
Thank you very much. Doug Fennell, are we done with your question?
I'm done with my question. Vice Chair Crosby, I understand exactly what you're saying. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we have Dr. No, Robert Inton.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
You're here to testify favorably on behalf of this bill?
Well, I wouldn't be Dr. No anymore. Mr. Weintraub appreciated you calling him Dr. No Jr. yesterday. And I was signed up favorable with amendments yesterday, but moving on. I've represented the American Property Casualty Insurance Association for many, many years. And let me just say that, the theme that I've heard, listening to this now this bill for almost an hour, is about choice and consumers not making a knowledgeable choice. And I think, and I firmly believe that this bill has nothing to do, or will not in any way, shape, or form deal with the issue of consumers making a knowledgeable choice. What this bill will do is basically this will become, with all due respect to one of the witnesses on the other side, it will become a mandate. And the mandate will be that you'll have this coverage because people are not going to opt out. They don't opt in, they don't opt out. And the problem is, and nobody disputes this, at least, I don't think members of the committee clearly don't dispute, that what we need to do is to make sure that people make a knowledgeable choice. But you are going to pass a mandate. And let's say that instead of it being 50 to 100, let's say it's 25 to 50. So if you I don't know how many insured drivers there are, policies are issued, but let's say there's 500,000, and you take that and you multiply that, say by $25, you're talking about tens of millions of dollars in increased premium. And to answer the question, well, why do the carriers care? They'll make more money. Maryland carriers who I've represented for decades always are concerned about making sure that insurance in Maryland is as affordable as it can be. If you want us to work on fashioning a program that will make sure that people do make a knowledgeable choice, we're happy to do that. We're happy to consider legislation that would deal with that. But we believe wholeheartedly and sincerely that the net effect of this bill will basically be a mandated increase for all insureds. And that's not what you seem to be most concerned about. You can seem to be most concerned about people making a knowledgeable choice. This bill doesn't address that. Thank you.
Bob, I have a question. We talked about PIP, we talked about PIP insurance before. Could you explain how that works?
Right. Yes. Okay. So PIP is a very limited, non-complex, not expensive policy. And what PIP was kind of the answer to whether or not we should have no fault insurance. And you know, I've been down here, as you know, a long time. You only have to look at me to see that. And that was kind of Maryland's response to no fault insurance, was to have this PIP coverage. It covers lost wages, and you know this, you're a personal injury.
Right. I guess I was asking because let me get to the point. How you have to waive PIP, correct?
Right.
So you're basically, that's another opt out, correct?
That is an opt out.
And so
it's a much less complex product.
I mean, depending on how you draft it, I agree. Everything's a complex product when you get a bunch of attorneys involved. Because I want to make it clear that we already have opt out only stuff on the books now. And secondly, I want to talk in 2017, although Delegate Crosby has villainized some of the members of this committee. I wanted to say, when we passed that bill in 2017, there was a requirement for education. Isn't that correct? Didn't you guys agree that we were going to try and educate the populace on the stacking?
I'm not familiar with that language, but I certainly, you know,
has there been any education? Has there been, and again, we had these discussions, but has there been any education from your side, the insurance side, to the individuals and to the community about the benefits? Because we can't doubt, I don't believe anybody on your side or either side is doubting the benefit of the stacking coverage. Has there been any education on those benefits?
I don't know the answer to that, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, thank you. Delegate Fennell, your hand is still up. Do you have another question? I'll take that as a no. Delegate Seth Howard.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Bob, real quick, you said PIP is a limited product. Talk about some of those limitations versus the product that we're talking about here today.
Okay, well, I guess, you know, I've learned a lot about the product that we're talking about here today, just sitting through the hearing for the last 2 days. And it's not a simple product. It all depends on how much coverage you have, how much coverage the other driver has, what the policy limits are. There are a lot of factors that go into that. What PIP is pretty simple. PIP basically says that regardless of fault or anything else, your PIP coverage is going to pay your medical bills and your lost wages up to a certain amount, $5,000, whatever it is. That's it. It's simple. I think people understand it. It's been around for, I don't know, 20 or 30 years. I don't know that there's anybody in the committee today, while most people in the committee seem to be saying, we don't know anything about how this stacking and this uninsured and all this stuff works. But I don't think there's anybody on the committee that doesn't understand what PIP is and how it works. It's pretty simple.
Is there a concern in the insurance industry that as this product, as the trajectory, let's say we do mandate this, and as the trajectory of this product goes out and it's accessed more by the courts and lawyers, the cost would go up and be borne by the consumer?
That's a really good question, Delegate. I guess we don't, I mean, that's not a concern that I've heard from our carriers, but I think it would be. Once again, I mean, no matter what we've seen in your committee for all these years, we're committed to trying to keep costs of auto insurance down. Maybe, if what the advocates want is that this policy will, be more widespread, it's going to be used more, I would think that would drive up the cost.
Sounds reasonable to me. Okay, thank you, Bob.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Bob, for your testimony. I believe now we next have apologies. Tina Quigley.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good afternoon. Good afternoon, committee members. I'm Tina Quigley, Legislative and Regulatory Counsel with Allstate. I am here in opposition to House Bill 266. So there's been a lot discussed here. The conversation is focused really on just one type of accident. And this coverage is intended for when you're struck by an underinsured motorist. So the conversation is focused on insurance as if protecting you is the purpose of auto insurance. And that actually isn't why this state and virtually every other state mandates auto insurance. The purpose of all of us carrying auto insurance is to protect the people who we may injure. And Mr. Chairman, to your point earlier, we do discuss these two coverages in this, actually, it wasn't you, Mr. Chairman, it was, I think, Delegate Watson who talked about the two coverages that we discuss in the same vein, the uninsured motorist coverage and underinsured motorist coverage. So uninsured motorist coverage stands in the place for the driver who has failed to live up to that legal obligation to carry the minimum financial responsibility limits. The underinsured motorist coverage is designed to close the gap between the driver who has at least purchased insurance and your policy limit that you selected. It was never that the underinsured motorist coverage that you get that entire limit. It was to close the gap. To the questions that you've asked, Mr. Chairman, and to the comments made by Delegate Adams and Delegate Arentz, we don't just sell you additional coverage because we can. We're looking to ensure that you're buying the appropriate limits for you and the appropriate coverage for you. So in the history of uninsured, underinsured motorist coverage, these were not actually part of the system at all in the beginning, because again, that wasn't the purpose of the coverage. Now that's developed over time, and Maryland, like a number of other states, mandates that you have this as part of your insurance policy, underinsured and uninsured motorist coverage. That is a default inclusion in your policy. So you already have in your policy underinsured and uninsured motorist coverage.
Yes, ma'am.
We, Mr. Chairman, have a few, your indulgence for just about 30 seconds.
Well, you're probably going to ask a question for me, so you might be able to involve yourself afterwards.
Okay. I want to talk about the opt-out approach and PIP. Comparisons made with PIP. So PIP is opt-out, but the PIP opt-out is different because the PIP coverage creates the baseline benefit. What you get from PIP that you can opt out from is the baseline benefit. The baseline benefit for uninsured and underinsured motorist coverage is already in your policy. That's why this enhanced coverage is an opt-in, and we think that that's the right way to offer this additional coverage.
And thank you. And I do understand that. My point of asking about PIP was merely to say when you're 20 years old and you're, in the world is your oyster, you're trying to save as much money as you can, you'll opt out of PIP because you can save money. So it's not like it's a mandate. It is an option. We use the word mandate. This bill, I guess, is a mandate that we, offer it, but it's not mandating that you have this form of insurance. So I wanted to correct everyone who continues to use that word mandate. This just allows you, like PIP. PIP is not mandated either. It's just opt out. And secondly, man, you did say something about how your insurance is to protect others. Now, maybe back in, Delegate Arentz days in, pre-Vietnam, that was the goal. But I don't just pay liability. I pay full coverage. Many of us pay full coverage. And I don't pay that because I'm a good Samaritan. I pay that to protect myself, my family, to the greatest extent possible. So to say that somehow this insurance is just for others, I believe that I would disagree with you, at least my selfish act, because I want the most insurance that I can have for myself, my car, my property, and my family. And if there's an opportunity for me to have more without having to have a doctorate in economics, then I think that that's not a bad thing. Delegate Branch, and I'll say this, isn't that so? Because I'm sure you'll have an opportunity to ask in a minute, because I know Delegate Branch has a question. Go ahead, Delegate Branch.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, I'm missing something here. Just like the chairman, he owns a Tesla.
Really?
And he wants a Cadillac insurance. So shouldn't everybody have that option? I mean, knowing that I'm covered and I got more than enough would make me feel much more comfortable. From what I heard from the basketball referee, I can't remember her name, and from one of those that testified, that they're getting shortchanged. They're using their insurance and they're using the other insurance as a stacking, but they're still coming out short, and people are still having to pay out of their pockets. So I think that's what drew me into trying to get a better understanding of what was really going on, because I don't like to see people having to do that. And so could somebody explain that and why that's the case, and why shouldn't someone be able to get paid for a, if you will, Cadillac sort of insurance if that's their choice? But evidently it's not being offered as much, because if you look at one glass, it's empty or half empty, and the other one is very, very full. Thank you.
Thank you, Delegate Branch. And just to clarify my comments earlier, I just want to make sure that we understand that I was really talking about the history of auto insurance and how it has evolved. And I believe I did say that that's evolved over time, that originally it was to protect the people that we may injure, but that has, of course, evolved over time. And
that was more of an attack on Delegate Arentz. I totally got you. It was just a chance to jump on Delegate Arentz. Thank you.
But Delegate Branch, you are, of course, free to purchase, higher than the minimum limits that are available, that are required by the state. I think the state currently requires 30, 60, 15. Somebody's going to correct me if I'm wrong. And so, you can buy 100, 350 if you'd like, or even more, and buy an umbrella policy. So by purchasing higher limits, you ensure that you are, in fact, protected the way that you'd like to be.
Thank you very much. Next, we have Delegate Ben Brooks.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. This will be quick. Ms. Quigley, I would think, as my agent, you would want to make sure that I'm getting the best protection that's possible, And then being the professionals in that arena, we just seem that we have this perception that our agents is going to do whatever is best to make sure that our families are protected, and just like you would do for one of your loved ones, So I think it's sort of disconcerting to learn about those, knowing that these pitfalls are out there, and most of us don't even know about it, And I just don't see why would you not want to protect? I mean, if the rates are going to be higher, then so be it. And then if your customers know what they're dealing with, then they will all be informed customers, But at least give us the option to make it. We don't want these gotcha moments, especially when it comes to insurance. Thanks. Your comment on that, please.
Delegate Brooks, I think that there have been some ideas that were discussed already during this hearing. Again, when the bill passed, it was to be the enhanced underinsured, or EU enhanced uninsured motorist coverage, was to be offered on new policies sold. And so I think that there's been an idea suggested that we could offer it also on renewal policies. And so, I mean, that is one option that the committee could consider.
All right, thank you. Thanks, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. And our last question for this witness, Delegate Mounts.
Thanks, Chairman. I couldn't resist. I was trying to keep my powder dry, but I've had a rough run. You know, I had this new vehicle and 5 years, 5 deer, and the last one was just devastating, and it was awful. I've got a lot of experience with insurance in the last 6 months, and so I was listening to the debate, and I'm interested from an Allstate perspective. I'm not an Allstate member, but I'm Allstate's great. But so if this were mandated, or if there was a mandated, if there was an opt out put in, I just had to redo. I bought a new vehicle, so I had to get new insurance, and you had to spend that time on the phone and go through. I mean, so much stuff, and so different than the chairman. We're talking about being younger. When you're older, you want to get all kinds of insurance, you know. But I guess so. If this were to go into law, then when you're going through that phone call, it would be offered then as a discount, right? So when you're getting your coverage, you would be asked if you would want to opt out, and that would drop your rate. Is that how this would be presented while you're on the phone negotiating your insurance?
So I think that what you would see, thank you for your question, Delegate Meltz. I think that what you would see is after the bill, if the bill were to pass in its current form as an opt-out, what you would see is a rate increase from insurance companies across the board. And then because I mean, I'm not sure, but I think that that's what you would likely see. But I am not part of our products team, so I'm not sure how this coverage would work.
But you don't think that there would be an opt-out? If you opt out, then you would get a reduced premium.
You will.
Or do you think the premiums would just stay at a higher level generically because of the added liability for the producer?
So currently it's an opt-in. So the rates that you have now, if you've elected it, then I doubt that there would be much. I don't know for sure, Delegate Meltz, and the more I talk about this, the more I realize there are a lot more considerations as to whether you purchase it or whether more than just one Marylander purchases it. I think that if you refer to the Insurance Administration's written informational letter, that they foresee an increase, that some people may see an increase in rates under the bill.
Well, I think you've answered my question, and my question really, I was hopeful. I think I understand the perspective in that the producers are pretty much risk averse, and so they will take the most risk averse position considering this change in law. So that, based off what you're telling me, I think you're saying is that everybody's premiums will go up, and whether you opt out or not, it really doesn't matter, but the rates are going to go up. And it's not going to have a direct impact on individual premiums. Is that what you're telling me?
I will have to get back to you, Delegate Meltz.
Okay, thank you.
Assuming Delegate Brooks' hands, Delegate Brooks, you have another, okay, thank you. Our last witness on this bill, Bryson Popham.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Vice Chairman, members of the committee. Bryson Popham, appearing today in opposition to the bill on behalf of the Maryland Association of Mutual Insurance Companies and the Insurance Agents and Brokers Association. I think I'm the only witness representing insurance agents on this panel. You've heard a great deal of debate. I'm not going to repeat anything that has been said, but I will repeat the themes. First of all, I will ask you, I will beg you to read the MIA letter on this bill, the last sentence of which says that default coverage, which we have here, selection should never be the most expensive option available. One of the proponents early on began another theme that has been sounded throughout this hearing, and that is about consumer education. I think we can agree that consumers need to be better educated about this coverage. I know my clients would certainly willingly participate in such an education effort. But if you carefully examine the MIA letter, you will see a couple of things that should jump out at you. One is that a survey of 100 EUIM claims produced nothing that wouldn't have already been paid under uninsured, underinsured motorist coverage. Furthermore, that the low end of the range of increased premiums, if this bill were to pass, would be $50. It could range up to several $100s. There are literally millions of cars in this state. And it doesn't say to me that this only happens on new business. So that means you're going to see, Delegate Motz, an automatic rate increase for a whole lot of people. And those people are going to call my clients. They're going to call the MIA. Some of them are going to call you. And we have to be able to carefully, completely explain that to them. This is an affordability issue. Please don't make this product less affordable than it already is. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
And Bryson, just a quick question before we go on to Delegate Jackson. So I know what the MIA said. It said that default coverage should never be the most expensive. Would you, with your knowledge, say that adding the opt-out to the 30/60 coverage that we have now would be the most expensive option? I mean, because that's what the MIA is alleging, but I want to hear it from you. Is that the most expensive option?
I agree. If I understand your question correctly, the answer is yes. And if I understand your question correctly, I think you're asking if we pass this bill and make this coverage opt out, that is the most expensive option. That is a correct statement.
That default coverage. So if I got, I don't know, more coverage, if I got the 100,000, 500,000, wouldn't that be more expensive than the default out 30/60 coverage? Or if I got the million, 2 million, wouldn't that even be more expensive?
Respectfully, Mr. Chairman, I think you're comparing apples and oranges here. There is nothing like this coverage, the so-called enhanced coverage. There is uninsured motorists, there's underinsured motorists, there's liability insurance. Those are three distinct coverages. This is something quite different. There's nothing like it.
But to the common person, it's how much they pay every 6 months.
Yes.
We'll talk about what's most expensive.
That's
so
right.
I would allege that if I got the lowest coverage that's required by Maryland versus the coverage that I have, that I'm paying a significant amount more. And the default coverage is definitely that versus what I pay, what most people pay. But again, I don't want to corner you because I see your point. I'll go on to Delegate Jackson.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. I guess I'm just a little confused because I sat in a number of committee hearings where insurance companies came in and wanted to pass what they call tools to help save them money, but would increase costs to consumers. So I'm kind of confused why they are fighting or opposed to this bill when, I mean, the coverage is there and the consumer have an option to opt out of it. Like, I don't.
Delegate Jackson, that's a good question. Some of your colleagues have asked it. It's a difficult one to address, so I'll try to do it this way. There are over 100,000, maybe 200,000 insurance companies out there fighting for your business. There are millions of automobiles out there that would be affected by this bill, excuse me. Those companies don't want your premium to be any higher than it has to be. That's why in 2017, with the full knowledge and support of the trial bar, we passed the law that is in effect today. Now, they thought that more people would buy the coverage. I can't fault their judgment. And now they want to change it so that everybody has to buy the coverage. To me, that's a mandate. The cost is going to go up for a lot of people who will never, ever use this coverage. And that's not a good thing. That's a bad thing.
Yeah, but the option is that they can opt out of it.
Yes, that is correct. And there is a process. And I looked through the bill. I encourage you to do so. I think it is a complicated process. And I would suggest to you, I will ask you, if most people get their insurance premium in the mail, and it happens to be, let's just say $50, which is the low end of the MIA scale, higher, are most of them just going to pay it and grumble, or are they going to go through the process to opt out? I suggest to you that a lot of people are going to pay for something that they don't need.
Yeah, I mean, but if it's higher, I mean, some people will question it, I believe. if their premium is not the same.
Agreed.
So-
Some people will. I agree with you.
Yeah.
Many people will not.
So I just don't understand like why you against this, but I mean, I've heard some crazy tools that you guys wanted to implement in the state of Maryland.
We don't want, whether I'm talking about agents or companies, and it's most important to make this point. We don't want the product to cost any more than it has to. And if you pass this bill, it's going to cost more than it has to.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. I believe that is all the witnesses for this very short bill hearing. Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair. We'll now move on to Delegate Brooks.
Okay, thank you, Chair Wilson, Vice Chair Crosby, and members of my wonderful committee. For the record, I'm Delegate Ben Brooks, Baltimore County. Thank you for the opportunity to testify before you on HB 350 as the Underground Facilities Damage Prevention Enforcement. This bill authorizes the Maryland Underground Facilities Damage Prevention Authority to those of you in the construction industry and an excavation industry, miss utility. The ability to impose additional punitive measures when a person fails to notify the one-call system before performing excavation or demolition in the state, or violates any other requirement related to excavation and demolition. Specifically, instead of or in addition to assessing civil penalties pursuant to current law, the authority may, one, require a person to participate in damage prevention, training, or implement procedures to mitigate the likelihood of damage to underground facilities, or two, impose other similar measures. HB 350 seeks to merely remedy a housekeeping measure to correct an unintentional clerical error made during the 2020 legislative session that inadvertently removed the original damage prevention training language in the Maryland Underground Facilities Damage Prevention Authority statute. That provision provides the authority other remedies to, rather than imposing a civil penalty. Introducing in this emergency bill will allow the provisions to become immediately utilized by the authority without further delay. For that reason, I'm requesting a favorable report. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Delegate Brooks. We will go to Bruce Bariano.
Good afternoon, Mr. Vice Chairman, members of the committee. For the record, Bruce Bariano, I'm here on behalf of the Underground Authority Facilities Committee. I want to thank Chairman Brooks for introducing this legislation. I do not have too much to add. He has explained that it was a human, normal error that occurs in life. It's a very important provision in the law that was enacted in 2010. Just was dropped from the bill 2 years ago unintentionally. And we need to put it back in the law as soon as possible so that the authority, as they're considering cases, has this alternative remedy to utilize. It's a very important remedy, as Delegate Brooks explained. And we would hope that, very respectfully, this committee would be sensitive to this situation and very promptly consider and pass favorably this bill, because it's just putting back in the law what was in the law and no one ever intended to take it out, so that this can hopefully move along in its emergency bill and be back in the law as quickly as possible and signed by the governor so that it can then be utilized by the authority. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Bariano. Next up, we have James Barron.
Muted. Thank you for the opportunity to speak in favor of the bill today. I am the Executive Director of the Maryland Underground Facilities Damage Prevention Authority. We are the enforcement arm of the Michigan Utility Law. We are seeking a favorable report. I don't know why I'm getting an echo. But
I don't have an
looking
echo
for
on my end, sir. We can hear you.
Okay. When the authority issues fines for power violators, we almost always give a 50% discount on fines for people who take the damage prevention training. Although the fines are a deterrent to repeat offenders, we believe that effective damage prevention training which we provide free of charge, is the better option. So therefore, we're asking to have this language reinserted into Title 12 with this emergency legislation. We're seeking a favorable report, and I thank you for the opportunity to speak today.
Thank you, sir. And for whatever it's worth, you popped up twice with 2 boxes. So I don't know if you're signed in, but that's probably why you hear the echo. Maybe my eyesight's going, but you're definitely in here twice. Next up, Tiffany Harvey.
Good afternoon, Vice Chair Crosby and committee members. For the record, Tiffany Harvey, President of Government and Regulatory Affairs for Comcast in Maryland and Delaware. I am here to testify in support of HB 350. You've already heard the background on the bill. The only thing I would add to that, this committee is undoubtedly aware of the federal funds that have flowed into Maryland for the express purpose of expanding broadband connectivity. We're excited about the work that the state, counties, and carriers will be doing with these funds. That said, broadband expansion also means more trenching, which creates increased risk of facilities damage. This bill is merely going to restore the authority's ability to require participation in damage prevention training or implement procedures to mitigate the likelihood of damage to underground facilities. I think the need for the bill has been made clear, and Comcast is fully supportive of the sponsor's goals with HB 350. So we would lend our support and request a favorable committee report. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Harvey. And that completes all the witnesses. Are there any questions for this panel? Seeing none, that concludes the hearing on House Bill 350. Mr. Chair, do you want to take back over or you want me to keep going? Okay. Next up,
I got it, Brian.
Oh, okay.
We're on House Bill. We're on the 4th one, which is House Bill 88. Delegate Charkoudian.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, Mr. Vice Chair, colleagues. It's good to be here talking about House Bill 88. For the record, Delegate Lori Charkoudian asking for favorable report on House Bill 88. So this bill is about 2 things that I want to highlight. First, this bill is about the distribution grid. That is the poles, the wires, the transformers, the circuits. We ask a lot of the grid. We don't often set policy explicitly about the grid. But most importantly, if I can pick up where the last witness left off, it is about getting as much federal money as we can into the state to support that grid. And this is really important because federal money that supports our distribution grid is money that ratepayers do not have to pay. So I want to talk a little bit about the bipartisan infrastructure bill. The bill includes $5 billion to support grid hardening grants. That's in section 40101. $6 billion in grants for innovative approaches to transmission, storage, distribution infrastructure to harden and enhance the system reliability and resilience. So that's section 40103. $3 billion in expansion of the smart grid matching grant program for enhancing grid flexibility, including investment in distribution systems, microgrids, vehicle to grid technology. That's section 40107. And $500 million in the state energy program 40109. What this translates to, depending on how Maryland plays its cards over the next, immediately and over the next few years, is somewhere between tens of millions and potentially hundreds of millions of dollars coming to the state of Maryland. The federal government is investing this kind of money into the grid because they recognize that the grid is key both for decarbonization as well as to prepare for the impact of extreme weather events associated with climate change. Maryland must do the same. So in general, the distribution grid is paid for by our ratepayers. The more federal money we bring into the state, the less money ratepayers need to pay for these crucial grid modernization efforts. We've spent a lot of time on this committee talking about we need to do these things for clean energy, for the grid, for preparation, but we also are worried about ratepayers. We have this moment to say, let's get all of this right. Let's get it right in policy. Let's tee up the PSC and MEA and the utilities to get it right, because this moment is when we can get this federal money into the state and save ratepayers money while addressing these issues. So while the General Assembly will put the state, with this bill, the General Assembly will put this state on a path to ensure that our distribution system planning process are designed to meet the state's goals related to decarbonization and equity. We've passed some great bills related to electric vehicles, community solar, emergency preparation. But if the grid itself is not planned and invested in properly, it will undermine all of our other strong policies. When we get this right, we can expect to see significant investment in the grid. As with every major infrastructure investment, we need to make sure that the jobs we create are good jobs with family-sustaining wages that will multiply in our communities to build strong local economies. This bill ensures that the labor standards are incorporated into the distribution system planning and that the work that gets done creates good jobs. This bill was pre-filed in November. Since then, I've had multiple conversations with stakeholders, Public Service Commission, utilities. And if you take a look at their feedback, their concerns, and the fiscal note and the cost in the fiscal note, it has to do with the fact that the bill establishes a work group and that they have moved forward with a similar work group. And their position sort of, I think, assumes that my work group is separate from their work group. So what I have done is I have submitted along with my testimony, a revised version of my bill that takes out the explicit work group section, but it includes an explicit section that says there has to be good stakeholder involvement. So it wouldn't be duplicative of the current effort, but it would reinforce the current effort and double down on the fact that there has to be stakeholder involvement. So that really takes care of not all, but a lot of what you're going to hear in opposition. As well as it takes care of the vast majority of the fiscal note. That's that's attached to my testimony today. And of course, there's the possibility for more work and more discussion around that. So it's crucial that the General Assembly act this year. I think there's a lot of conversations of what bills do we have to pass this year, what can wait. Part of that is because of the urgency of climate change. But part of it comes back to the federal funds. And I want to say one other thing about the federal funds, which is this money is available from 2026 to 2022 to 2026. And it starts becoming available as soon as May. And it is available until it runs out. And while some of it is formula funding, some of it is competitive grants. And so while I'm open to having conversations about adjustments to the bill, possible amendments, I really hope that you all will join with me in making sure we pass something this year that ensures that Maryland is positioned to get the grid right and to get as much federal money as possible to getting the grid right, thus saving our ratepayers money for the next several years. I urge a favorable report. I look forward to questions and conversation.
Hearing none. Okay. I know that you had a long list of individuals you want to call in specific order. However, I'm not going to be able to accommodate. I will just be able to call your first panel of 5, and then we'll have to go in a regular order. Number 1, Gary Griffin.
Yes, sir. Good afternoon, Chairman Wilson, Vice Chair Crosby, and distinguished committee members. For the record, my name is Gary Griffin. I'm a proud 42-year member of the International Brotherhood of Electrical Workers and a lifelong resident of Maryland. With the financial support soon available to the states from the federal government via the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, this bill will be a great opportunity to put into place legislation that will, for far into the future, help the working people and employers in Maryland, which in turn will strengthen our communities, which will strengthen our state, while strengthening the electrical grid in Maryland. Maryland residents deserve the good paying jobs and benefits the labor standards in this bill will provide as we expand and improve the electrical grid. This bill will be an investment in Maryland's working families, employers, and electrical independence. I respectfully ask for you to give HB 88 a favorable report, and thank you for allowing me to address you today.
Thank you very much, sir. Seeing no questions, we move on to our Tom Clark.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair, Mr. Vice Chair, members of the committee. My name is Tom Clark. I am a representative of IBW Local 26. I'm speaking in support of HB 88, a bill not necessarily geared towards public utilities, but towards working families in Maryland. It provides the working class a seat at the table as our state transitions to cleaner energy sources and more localized distribution systems. The largest faction in the phrase public utilities is the ratepayer, the men and women that consume the energy, that pay the bills and work on these projects. These men and women would like to be heard. They would like to be a partner in a work group, not just today, but 20 and 30 years from now. After years of stagnant wages and benefits, as well as this awful pandemic, we are in the midst of a skilled labor shortage. Consequently, 2022 is the year of the worker. Actually, economists predict that this entire decade will be beneficial for skilled labor. For that reason, I commend the sponsor of this forward-thinking bill. Let us not wait until 2027 to address the labor shortage. If utilities fail or service diminishes, the ratepayer will not care why. They will just point fingers at all of us. I encourage you to act now, give the working class a seat at the table, and set basic labor standards for your constituents, like healthcare, certified training, and local hiring. Vote to employ ratepayers such as minority individuals, women, veterans, and returning citizens. I appreciate the committee's time, and I encourage you to support HB 88 for the working class of Maryland. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir. The next one we're going to hear from is Jeff Guido.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Vice Chair, and committee members. Jeff Guido on behalf of the Baltimore DC Metro Building Trades Council in support of House Bill 88. We feel as Maryland moves forward with improvements to the distribution grid, it is imperative for contractors and subcontractors pay the prevailing wage rate and to be subject to all state reporting and compliance requirements, participate in registered apprenticeship programs with the state of Maryland, been compliant with federal, state wage and hour laws in the previous 3 years, and establish and execute an outreach program for underserved communities and individuals as returning citizens, women, single parents, minority individuals, and veterans, with an aspirational goal of 25% of all total work hours performed by Maryland residents, including individuals with one or more of the groups identified. Offer healthcare and retirement benefits to the employees working on the project, maintain appropriate license requirements, are in good standing to perform the work. And if the projects come under a project labor agreement, it exempts the prevailing wage requirement of the construction and renewable energy. We urge the committee for a favorable report. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we have James Horton.
Good afternoon. My name is James Horton. I'm the business manager here at Local Union 70, and we supply qualified workers for the Baltimore Gas and Electric Company. And I just want to touch on the importance of qualified workers. Myself, I started as a groundman. I went through a 4-year apprenticeship program, and I have made it to journeyman lineman. I got a certificate in the Department of Labor, state and such. And all of our workers that we send out are trained, qualified workers. There was recently a hurricane down in Louisiana. There was 2 workers, a 19-year-old and a 20-year-old, that were electrocuted and did not make it through that electrocution, and they passed away. They were on trade. They were linemen for a non-union contractor. With us, you would be 22 at 18. You would be 22 years old before you were ever qualified journeyman lineman, would be able to go out there and work on these energized lines without a skilled journeyman lineman by your side. So I think it's imperative that we have these utilities adopt the apprenticeship programs, so they end up with qualified workers. And of course, all of us have children, brothers, sisters. No one wants to make that call. In my position, I'll be the person who made that call if someone died in the line of duty. And I just don't understand why a utility would not want qualified workers and under working on our systems. And it just isn't appropriate that they would put someone in that position to work on. All our work is done energized. for the most part. We just can't turn electric off every time we work on it. So it's a very hazardous job, and I would appreciate the panel imposing a certified apprenticeship and training program for the utilities to follow. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir. Next, we have Mr. Chuck Cook.
Thank you, Chairman. Appreciate it. Members of the committee. I'm not going to belabor the point what the affiliates of the State Federation have talked about when it comes to standards. I do want to point out that this is an historic opportunity, as the sponsor talked about, of leveraging these federal dollars for actually planning our grid for the future. And with that opportunity, we really need to take hold of it to bring all the folks that we have on the work group into this process. And we applaud what the PSC is starting the process of doing, but unfortunately, the commission has determined that the utility should really retain the primary control of distribution planning. And we understand where that would be a natural inclination to do that. But unfortunately, we disagree in the fact that all of us, most notably you, members of the General Assembly, policymakers, when we're talking about doing this in the future, a generation, 2 generations down the line of planning, this should absolutely have your input, should have the input of all the stakeholders, most notably the affiliates that you just heard from that do this work day in and day out, to have a full understanding of what it's going to take to move to a cleaner energy future that has strong labor standards, that has the ability to actually create good family sustaining jobs. So we really can't leave this opportunity on the table and allow the planning to happen without our input. So for that reason, we definitely ask that for a favorable report on HB 88.
Thank you very much, sir. Next, we have Leslie Elder.
Thank you for the opportunity to provide favorable testimony on House Bill 88. I'm Leslie Elder, the Mid-Atlantic Director for the Coalition for Community Solar Access, and congratulations, Chairman, on your appointment. CCSA is a national trade association charged with implementing best practices for all community solar markets across the country. I represent 80 member companies and more than 50 who participate in the Community Solar Pilot Program right here in Maryland. Recently, the Department of Energy has committed to power over 5 million households with community solar by 2025. This is a 700% increase over the next few years. A commitment of this size is an indication that we need this legislation. House Bill 88 is a critical importance to ensure that Maryland thoughtfully integrates these technologies and distributed energy resources as quickly and efficiently as possible. Long-term planning without a robust stakeholder engagement from various government agencies, utility representatives, industry leaders, and most importantly, community members is vital to the successful implementation. As seen in other states, these work groups will identify key issues on an ongoing basis, creatively problem solve for implementation, and facilitate a better process for coordination. Furthermore, the legislative requirement for a study for distribution planning is critical to the advancement of decarbonization for high levels of DER and how to best benefit the frontline communities and low and moderate income customers. This undertaking is cumbersome, but very important. And House Bill 88 ensures that this process has an organized plan with very clear objectives. This legislation is essential as we move to a future with more dynamic distribution system that incorporates smart technologies with greater resilience and significant quantities of DERs. Thank you so much for your time and consideration. We hope we can count on you for a favorable report.
Thank you very much, ma'am. Next, we have Christian Tam.
Antoine Thompson speaking in her place. Antoine Thompson, dear Chair Wilson, Vice Chair Crosby, and members of the Economic Matters Committee. I am Antoine Thompson, Executive Director of the Greater Washington Region Clean Cities Coalition, also a homeowner in Upper Marlboro, Maryland. Our coalition is one of 90 plus clean city coalitions around the country supported by the U.S. Department of Energy. I'm here to testify in support of passing the Grid Reliability and Inclusive Distribution Act, HB 88. First of all, GWRCCC strives to ensure a just and equitable clean energy transition, which aligns with the distribution system planning process to be done in an equitable way to produce reliable, future-oriented energy infrastructure. We, at our organization, this law would directly impact us because we are a key stakeholder in the Mid-Atlantic electrification project, placing 200 electric vehicle chargers in DC, Maryland, and Virginia over the next 3 years. Therefore, it's very important that we have a process where we can engage with more stakeholders over the overall strategy to make sure that chargers are being placed throughout the community and that the grid is reliable. This is also important because the bipartisan infrastructure law will put an additional 500,000 EV chargers around the country. We stand ready to support your efforts. I strongly encourage everyone on the committee to go to the Alternative Fuels Data Center, which will show and document the current disparities that exist in the state of Maryland as relates to access to EV charging. Without intentionality, many communities will be left behind. We look forward to working with this committee, and thank you for this opportunity to speak.
Thank you. And from obviously, we have a lot of people testifying, so I apologize for doing this in advance, but if you're not signed up, you'll not be allowed to testify, guys. I appreciate everybody's cooperation. Next we have is Stacy Hartwell.
Good afternoon, Chairman Wilson, Vice Chair Crosby, and members of the Economic Matters Committee. For the record, again, my name is Stacy Hartwell. On behalf of the NAACP Maryland State Conference, I urge a favorable report on House Bill 088, Public Utilities, Energy Distribution Planning, and Required Labor Standards. This bill works in concert with the Public Service Commission's distribution system planning process by providing valuable guidelines to the process, including equity considerations in our state's distribution grid. As many of you may know, our distribution grid is the system of poles, wires, transformers, and substations supplying electricity to our communities. Importantly, this bill directs federal infrastructure funding to support grid investments, saving ratepayers money and aiding the state in meeting renewable energy goals. Our General Assembly must urge the PSC to leverage federal funds and work to modernize our grid structure. By modernizing our power grid, we can ensure all Marylanders have access to reliable, affordable, and pollution-free energy. Low-income and Black communities suffer the most from failures in our grid infrastructure. Decades of chronic underinvestment of grid infrastructure has resulted in an outdated, unreliable power system, one that disproportionately affects low-income communities and communities of color. We saw the failure of investing in the grid infrastructure and the compound crisis of climate change have catastrophic consequences. Last February, when failing infrastructure in Texas caused millions of homes to lose power and resulted in 11 deaths. Yet Texas was not impacted equally. While Texas downtown areas had their power restored quickly, many low-income communities endured fatal blackouts for several days. By ensuring that the PSC takes into account our state's climate goals, we can also ensure that Black and low-income communities who are more vulnerable to pollution impacts from burning fossil fuels would benefit markedly from improved technologies like utility scale storage and a more reliable grid during times of high demand. We look forward to your favorable reply.
Thank you very much, ma'am. Next witness we have is Victoria Venable.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members of the committee for the opportunity to express my support for HB 88. For the record, my name is Victoria Venable. I am the Maryland Director of the Chesapeake Climate Action Network and CCAN Action Fund. I'd like to focus my testimony today on the critical window of time that we are currently in. As I'm sure you have heard from myself and many of my colleagues in the climate movement, the 2020s are a decisive decade to make meaningful changes to emissions and avoid a climate crisis. But we are also at a pivotal moment because in November 2021, Congress passed the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, the IIJA. This law is bringing one of the largest investments in energy infrastructure in US history, making 2022 a year not only of urgency, but also of opportunity. We have worked so hard with many of you on this committee to put Maryland on the path for a clean energy transition. Federal funds can help us support this transition, but only if Maryland is positioned to harness those funds. Many funding streams from the IIJA are competitive merit-based grants that require states to demonstrate commitments to carbon reductions, renewable energy deployment, and labor standards. HB 88 helps Maryland prepare for this window of opportunity by defining how we will meet state goals and providing support and guidance to the existing Public Service Commission's distribution planning process. This will make Maryland competitive and ready for the federal funds. Important to keep in mind is that the IIJA requires many of these grant programs to be up and running 180 days after the law was enacted. That puts us in May of 2022, meaning if we do not pass legislation this session, we may actually miss out on some of these incredible funding opportunities. We cannot afford to leave this money on the table. Thank you to the sponsor for her excellent work on this legislation and collaboration with the Public Service Commission to ensure that this bill complements and supports the work that they are doing. For all of the reasons stated above, I urge a favorable report from the commission from the committee on HB 88. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Venable. Next, we have Maya Gogel. Did I say that correctly?
Mia Gogel, so no, but good try. Thank you, Vice Chair Crosby and members.
One second, ma'am. I'm hearing a terrible echo. We can restart the clock for you, so you still have your 2 minutes, but I'm just hearing an echo. Are you signed in twice? Do you have it up? Do you have it up on 2 screens?
I should be signed in twice, and I tested my Zoom and I did not have an issue with an echo. I don't know if it's the position of the back wall, maybe.
No, I don't think it's that. I think you're signed in twice. So, yeah, do you have the recording on as well?
I don't think
this. Why don't you just troubleshoot it, and I will come back to you next.
Okay. Thank you so much.
David Lapp.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Chair Wilson, Vice Chair Crosby, members of the committee for the opportunity to speak here today. I'm David Lapp for the Office of People's Counsel. Our office strongly supports House Bill 88 to require the Public Service Commission to hold a distribution planning proceeding and to adopt regulations as part of that proceeding. This planning is key to enhancing Maryland's electric system, both to meet the needs of consumers and to achieve the state's climate goals. I want to quickly address 3 reasons these benefits from system planning are at great risk of being delayed or missed altogether without General Assembly action. The first is that while the Commission has initiated a distribution planning work group process, one that we welcome, the scope of that process, its goals, its outcome, and its timing are highly uncertain, despite more than 6 months passing since the work group was formed. It's not unusual for the Commission work groups to extend months and years without significant progress on challenging issues. The second reason legislation is needed is to avoid undesirable deference to the utilities. The Commission has stated that utilities should retain primary control of distribution planning, and that's the way the current process has gone. But utilities are motivated to increase returns for shareholders, and their system plans will reflect that motivation, not necessarily what is least cost or what best serves customer needs. Because utilities earn money for their investors by spending on capital, with undue deference to them, we could end up buying multiple flip phones before we even get the smartphone. A good planning process will bring us right to the smartphone at lower overall cost. Rather than deference to the utility plans, it should be state policymakers, including the General Assembly and the Commission as directed by the General Assembly, that should determine the least cost path for distribution planning. The third point, which you've heard about, is simple, and that is that HB 88 will facilitate state access to federal funding. Without instructions from this body, the state could miss out on federal grant money made possible by the infrastructure bill. That result would mean higher costs for Maryland customers, fewer benefits, and delayed progress on Maryland's climate goals. I appreciate the opportunity to speak here. We ask for a favorable report on House Bill 88. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Lapp. Delegate Rogers.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair. Mr. Lapp, so I appreciate what the bill is trying to do, and you spoke about, you know, some of the things we might lose out on with respect to not receiving that money if we don't pass the bill. And certainly I heard some of labor's arguments and what it means to them. But could you expand on perhaps how we could use some of that money and why it's important that we not wait any longer to pass this legislation? Because maybe we could get the money next year.
Sure.
Year after.
I think I'll defer to others, but I do think there is some immediate deadlines as far as looking to use that money. I think that the utilities are not as incentivized to go after that money as they might be if the commission, the infrastructure bill does require the Public Service Commission to be involved with the utilities in requesting some of the $5 billion under one of the main provisions of the bill that makes money available for the distribution grid. So without that cooperation from the utilities and without a direction to the Public Service Commission, there is a risk that that money will go unused. And the utilities are spending lots of money now on the distribution system, and they get a return on that money, but they do not get a return on grant money from the federal government. So they don't have a big incentive like they do to invest customer money. They don't have that same incentive with respect to grant money from the federal government.
So, I mean, again, I guess from where I sit, I saw a greater sense of urgency coming from the labor side, but from the People's Council, you're saying, I think, that doesn't sound very urgent. And I'm trying to understand from a People's Council standpoint, do we need to move now?
Absolutely, we need to move now. I mean, it's the need for commission action and a deadline. Right now, the commission's planning process could go on for years. We have a number of work groups that have gone on for years, and difficult decisions are sometimes avoided, not made. You know, the work groups, there's an effort to get consensus. There's not always consensus. The utilities, have their bottom line that they want to meet. And this legislation would give a deadline for commission action, and it would require regulations at the end of that action. Right now, the commission has it may not issue regulations. There may be no orders at the end of the day. There may be just months or even years of discussion without any end result. This legislation would require something to happen by a date certain. And we need that. We need that for consumers, because consumers are going to continue to invest money in the distribution system, whether we like it or not. But those investments should not be into, like I said, flip phones. They're going to be sunk costs when we want to build a grid that meets the needs and desires of consumers in the future, and as well as meet state policy goals. The longer we wait, the more it's going to cost, and the less likely the state is going to meet its goals.
Okay,
Utility investments.
I think I got it now. That came across a little bit more compelling. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Yep. Hey, David, real quick, how many other states are postured to go after this pot of money already? Do you know?
I don't know if it's still pretty recent. So
okay.
I don't know off the top of my head. Yeah,
that's fine.
I certainly can look into that.
It's okay. Maya, I see you logged off and got back on. Do you want to try again, Ms. Gojul?
Yes. Can you hear me better?
I got you now. No echo. Go ahead.
Awesome. That is great to hear. Sorry for that issue, but I appreciate your patience. Thank you, Vice Chair Crosby and members of the Economic Committee for the opportunity to testify today. I'm Mia Gogol, Associate Director of Government Affairs for Baltimore County Executive John Ostrowski, and I'm here to speak in support of House Bill 88. Bold commitments being made to transition to renewable energy by leaders throughout the state are creating exciting opportunities and new demands for reliable renewable energy. In Baltimore County, we are committed to being part of this renewable energy future. The county is developing new solar capacity on closed landfills, transitioning fleets to EVs, and upgrading public buildings to be more energy efficient. Excitingly, Baltimore County is also poised to welcome robust supporting facilities in the burgeoning offshore wind industry at Trade Point Atlantic and Sparrows Point. As Maryland approaches this transition, we must ensure that our grid, network, and energy infrastructure are able to accommodate upcoming changes and the growing demands. This legislation encourages Maryland to plan ahead so that the electrical distribution grid can support shifts in renewable energy, the equitable distribution of electricity, and other anticipated changes in a cost-effective manner. None of these clean energy projects, however, are possible without the critical support of a skilled and ready workforce. It is critical to the county executive that workers driving these changes on the ground are treated fairly. House Bill 88 guarantees this by mandating that electric and gas companies require electric infrastructure project contractors and subcontractors to pay a prevailing wage and offer health insurance. They must implement plans for the recruitment of state residents with special consideration for veterans, women, minority individuals, and returning citizens. This is critical for the county at this time as we work to reemploy our workforce. This legislation will support the work of Baltimore County and other local governments as we increase our reliance on renewable energy for county operations. Therefore, Baltimore County asks for a favorable support on House Bill 88. Thank you.
Thank you. And I think the gentleman in the queue next to you keeps coming through. So let County Exec Oshevsky know you need your own office.
Thank you. I will let him know.
Next up, we have Antoine Thompson. Mr. Thompson.
You already spoke.
Okay. All right. We will move to the unfavorables. First up, Molly Knoll.
Good afternoon, Chairman and committee members. My name is Molly Knoll, and I'm a Senior Commission Advisor with the Maryland Public Service Commission. I'm here today to urge an unfavorable review of HB 88's distribution system planning requirements because they duplicate existing commission processes and are likely to create expensive and unintended consequences. Since 2016, the Commission has been focusing on grid modernization and distribution system planning through PC 44 and participation in a multi-year DOE joint task force on system planning. Just in 2001, the Commission held a public technical conference, launched the Distribution System Planning Workgroup, which is open to anyone, held 4 public educational sessions, and secured a contract for workgroup leadership. Initially, the Commission has charged the workgroup with increasing stakeholder involvement in utility planning, aligning utility system investments with state policy goals, and first and foremost, maintaining safe, reliable, and affordable service. HB 88 would divert resources from that process. Secondly, HB 88 presupposes a number of outcomes for the workgroup, specifically regulations related to a long list of complex and potentially conflicting topics, such as distributed energy resources, storage, non-wires alternatives, decarbonization, building and transportation electrification, demand response, resiliency, adaptation to climate change, equity, and labor standards. I could speak to each one of these, and some are more relevant to planning than others, but instead I will simply say that something can be done well, quickly, or cheaply, and at best you can have 2 of the 3. And HB 88 may accelerate the Commission's actions, but it's likely to compromise the final outcomes and increase costs to ratepayers. The Commission is well aware that utility investment decisions have long-term consequences and that preparing the grid to combat climate change is going to be incredibly challenging. We've been working on this for years. However, rushing this process now and codifying a nearly impossible list of burdens on distribution system planning is unlikely to serve Maryland in the long run. I'm available for any questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Next up, we have Dr. Pearl Donahue-Valet.
Donahue-Valet.
Valet, I apologize.
The easier ones. But thank you. Good afternoon, Mr. Vice Chair and members of the Economic Matters Committee. My name is Dr. Pearl Donahue-Valet, and I'm here on behalf of PEPCO and Delmarva Power and Light in opposition to House Bill 88. We agree with many of the important policy issues that the delegate raised in this legislation. However, the nuts and bolts distribution system planning process is not the right venue to address climate change mitigation and equitable climate outcomes. And in fact, as mentioned just by Ms. Knoll, the Commission has already created many of these venues for that discussion. And we agree with many of these important policy questions being raised. At PEPCO and DPL, we understand the magnitude of the climate crisis and the need to ensure equitable climate outcomes. and we are looking to partner with our jurisdictions to find ways to mitigate those impacts. One of the most important ways that we find to mitigate those impacts is to partner with our state and local jurisdictions to leverage other funding sources, such as federal funding. Here at PEPCO and DPL, we've gotten a head start, making sure that we have teams already proactively identifying those projects and programs that could be funded through the bipartisan infrastructure law so that we can hit the ground running on day one as soon as those funding opportunities are released. At its core, though, distribution system planning is about the poles, the wires, the distribution automation systems to make sure that the lights stay on, to make sure that we have safe, reliable, and affordable service. These poles and the wires are not related to all of the topics that were raised in this legislation. And the Commission has ongoing customer programs, customer incentives, and customer rate working groups to make sure that we are able to both address those issues and continue the very successful programs such as Empower that the Commission has already put forward. Mr. Vice Chair, thank you for the opportunity, and I would be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, and sorry for putting a French twist on it. Next up, we have Charles Washington.
Good afternoon, Vice Chair Crosby and members of the Economic Matters Committee. I'm Charles Washington here on behalf of BGE in respectful opposition to House Bill 88. I'll start my testimony where the good delegate from District 20 began, because on this point, the sponsor is absolutely correct. IIJA is a tremendous opportunity to invest federal funds in the electric grid. But this legislation is not necessary to seek federal funding. Our company has a strong track record of leveraging the opportunity for federal funds to decrease the cost of investments for our customers. A recent example was our successful effort to achieve a federal grant to reduce the cost of smart meters for our customers by $200 million. So anyone who represents to you that the utilities have not sought these funds, they're dead wrong. And those comments really aren't grounded in fact. And for IIJA, we've already begun the process of reaching out to state, county, and municipal stakeholders to partner on grant applications to invest federal funds in our infrastructure. Even if the General Assembly enacted this bill, it wouldn't take effect until October. You've already heard about potential May deadlines. Fortunately, we did not wait for House Bill 88 to jump at this historic opportunity, and the bill is not necessary for that purpose. You've already heard from the Commission about how this bill will undermine an inclusive planning process that is already underway, so I won't revisit those points. But I will just say that in this complex industry, the regulator must retain a discretion to regulate the utility planning process while considering evolving policy objectives and without reducing the PSC's flexibility to influence the technical outcomes. That's always been a tall order, and this bill would make that all the more difficult. So for these reasons, BGE opposes House Bill 88 and respectfully requests an unfavorable committee report. Thank you.
Great on time. Next up, we have Tom Dennison.
Good afternoon, Mr. Vice Chair, Mr. Chair, members of the House Economic Matters Committee. Tom Dennison with Southern Maryland Electric Cooperative, here also in opposition to House Bill 88. We certainly appreciate the work that Delegate Sharkunian has put in this bill and her willingness to work with us. And I think her efforts to remove the work group aspect of this is a good step. But I also, on behalf of SMECO, agree with my previous utility colleagues in the Public Service Commission that this matter is best handled in the current process that's underway at the Public Service Commission. That is the proper venue. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I'll just end there. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Dennison. Are there any questions? Seeing none, that concludes that bill. The next bill we'll go on to is House Bill 31, which again is Delegate Charkoudian.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, Mr. Vice Chair, Mr. Chair, colleagues. For the record, Delegate Lori Charkoudian here, asking for favorable report on House Bill 31. Continuing with the theme of making sure that Maryland is well positioned for federal funds and also taking advantage of all the money that has been available that maybe we've left on the table up until now. So Resiliency Hubs is a great program, and I want to actually start by giving a shout out to MEA for starting this program initially as a pilot. What Resiliency Hubs do is they are clean energy microgrids, and what microgrids do is they stay on when the rest of the power goes out in an extended grid outage. So thinking about Texas, thinking about New Orleans, thinking about Puerto Rico, thinking about places where we've seen devastation with extended grid outages, and what we've seen, as a previous speaker said on the previous bill, is that low-income communities, communities of color, are hit harder and have fewer resources to make it through those extended grid outages. The good news is that here in Maryland, we have this Resiliency Hub program. We have some successful programs already, Resiliency Hubs already up and running in the state. We have a few people, I think, who are here to talk about them. The first one in the country in a low-income housing development was the Powerhouse in Perkins Homes in Baltimore, and I think we're going to hear from someone on that shortly, although he may have had to go for an after-school program. So the idea behind this bill is to take this concept that was a pilot and to make it formally part of Maryland's resilience plan, formally part of what it is that we're going to have in place to make sure we're prepared, emergency preparedness for the future. So that's the first thing. The second thing that it does is that it taps into additional funding. It directs some additional state funding. It puts a minimum of the $500,000 of C funding, which is what it's had in the past. And then again, it directs MEA and the Maryland Emergency Management Systems to apply for federal funding that would be available. One of the unfortunate things that I learned is that there had been FEMA money that could have gone to this over the last couple of years that Maryland had not applied for. So in making Resiliency Hubs formally part of Maryland's resilience plans, and in requiring these agencies to apply for both FEMA money that's been available, as well as infrastructure money that we have been talking about, we can make sure that we really significantly increase the amount of clean energy microgrids, resiliency hubs that we have in the state. So I'll stop there. I think the examples that people are about to give of how this has worked will really give you a sense of how crucial this is for emergency preparedness and a resilient future. And I'm happy to take any questions.
Okay, I see you have a small panel here. First up, we have Travis Street.
Thank you. Dear Chair Wilson, I'm Vice Chair Crosby and members of the Economic Matters Committee. Hello and good afternoon. I'm Travis Street, the Director of Family and Community Engagement for the Living Classrooms Foundation. And I also was the first director of the Powerhouse here in Baltimore. At the end of 2007, moving into 2017, moving into 2018, the Living Classrooms Foundation's Powerhouse Community Center was equipped with solar panels and battery storage and is the first solar-powered public housing community resiliency center in the nation. We installed the system so Powerhouse would be prepared to assist the 1,400 residents of Perkins Homes in the event of extreme weather and human-created disruptions such as fires, uprisings, and large-scale power outages by providing heat, air conditioning, power, water, food, and communication options for the residents, while also continuing our diverse education, workforce, and supportive services for all ages. The system is being used as a resource for the community when the grid fails, creating enough clean energy to provide up to 72 hours of sustainable power in the community center. The system is used all the time and has gone. The system is used all the time and has, and the power in Perkins frequently go out on its hottest days. Although throughout the winter, the power doesn't go out as often, but the clean energy is still used throughout the center for the errands of the community. In 2018, we used the system and ran it for the whole 72 hours. We had a power outage and we jumped right into ACT. We're working with our vulnerable community, folks that had respiratory problems, getting them in, plugging in, having the community up in our community center for those 72 hours. It turned into a community cookout. So with that being said, our microgrid system is is vital and to the resiliency of our community. I look forward to more resiliency hubs being built throughout Maryland, and I'm in favorable of a report on HB 31. My apologies.
Thank you, sir. Next up, we have Lynn Heller.
Yes, hi. Thank you, Chair Wilson, Vice Chair Crosby, and members of the Economic Matters Committee. My name is Lynn Heller, and I am founder and CEO of the Climate Access Fund, which is a statewide nonprofit green bank that's focused on reducing the electricity bills of low-income households through access to community solar and clean energy. For the record, I also am honored to serve as the board chair of the Maryland League of Conservation Voters. The Climate Access Fund supports HB 31 because we believe climate change is an urgent threat to Marylanders, and the state must take action to reduce its impacts. Extreme weather events are becoming more frequent, more severe, and we have to be prepared for them, particularly in under-resourced communities where residents are less likely to be able to access basic needs and services in a crisis. Resiliency hubs located in LMI communities provide access to electricity for essential needs during power outages. HB 31 appropriately calls for consistent funding for an LMI resiliency hub program. The Climate Access Fund also supports HB 31 because it prioritizes resiliency hubs that are combined with community solar. That means that during the 99% of the time the electric grid is not down and power from the battery is not needed for the resiliency hub, at least 30% of the solar power generated by the resiliency hub would be allocated to LMI households. This would be done through Maryland's Community Solar Pilot Program, which allows households to sign up for power being generated somewhere other than on their own rooftops, and they get a credit at a discount, sometimes as high as 25%, on their electricity bills. By prioritizing resiliency hubs combined with community solar, HB 31 would benefit LMI households year-round through discounted electricity rather than only helping them during power outages. It would be a win-win. The Climate Access Fund urges a favorable report on HB 31, and we thank Delegate Charkoudian for her leadership. Thanks.
Thank you. Next, we have Stacy Hartwell.
Chairman Wilson, Vice Chair Crosby, and members of the Economic Matters Committee, good afternoon. For the record, my name is Stacy Hartwell, NAACP Maryland State Conference Chair of the Environmental Climate Justice Committee. I'm here today to urge your support for HB 31. This expands the opportunities for clean energy microgrids known as resilience hubs in low and moderate income communities. Our committee advocates for reducing harmful emissions, advancing clean energy, and coordinating efforts to increase the livability of communities while also strengthening their resilience. HB 31 supports all these goals. This legislation is vital for expanding access to solar energy and increasing funding for community solar projects in BIPOC communities. Currently, disparities in access to solar energy products are blatant. In the United States, although rooftop solar industry has experienced roughly 50% growth each year since 2012, Black census tracts have installed 69% less rooftop solar on average. These disparities are often attributed to differences in home ownership and income. However, significant disparities remain even after these differences are accounted for. This legislation offers a viable alternative for Black communities in Maryland to access solar energy through resilience hub projects. Furthermore, this legislation is important not only as an opportunity to reduce our reliance on fossil fuels and increase solar usage, but also because the mechanism the bill uses, resilience hub microgrids, are an essential tool to build the capacity for BIPOC communities to increase their resilience. As climate change continues to shift weather patterns and increase the intensity and frequency of extreme weather events, disaster preparedness and proactive resilience measures will be an important aspect of sustaining our communities. Clean energy investments are often unevenly distributed by race, income, and geography. The important piece of this legislation will ensure that Black low-income, moderate-income communities have an opportunity to access clean energy infrastructure. I request a favorable reply on HB 31. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Hartwell. And then our final witness for the day is David Wright.
Good afternoon, and thank you, Vice Chair Crosby, Chair Wilson, members of the committee. I appreciate the opportunity to provide testimony today, highlighting the benefits of energy resiliency, particularly in under-resourced communities, and the value of the resiliency programs that the Maryland Energy Administration provides. I serve as the Director of Project Development at Groundswell, which is a clean energy and equity-focused nonprofit organization. Washington, D.C. is our home, but we are active in Maryland and in a handful of other states as well. There is clear societal and human value in empowering community-based organizations to continue providing services when the local electrical grid goes down. The value of this resiliency, however, is largely ignored by current policy and market-based incentives. MEA's important program fills a critical gap in financing projects of this nature. Solar and battery installations on their own are not yet economically viable in Maryland without public funds to encourage and leverage private capital. So the MEA funding is critical for attracting additional capital to the marketplace and getting these projects off the ground. We greatly appreciate MEA's sustained commitment to funding resilience initiatives across multiple grant cycles, and MEA's leadership has made Maryland a national leader in this realm. Groundswell supports continued efforts to enhance the resilience and adaptability of neighborhoods across the state, particularly in under-resourced areas that are among the least resilient parts of Maryland, and where this kind of community supporting infrastructure is most critically needed. Thank you, and a special thanks to Delegate Charkoudian for her leadership on this issue.
Thank you, sir. And I want to thank everybody for their participation today. This concludes the House bill hearings for today, and check your email for the schedule next week. Thank you all so much.